Today we are going to study the fertilization in plants. Fertilization in plants. What is fertilization? The process of fusion of haploid male gamete and haploid female gamete to produce a diploid zygote is called fertilization. Haploid male gamete and haploid female gamete to produce a diploid zygote is called fertilization. All of you know that each pollen grain contains two male gametes and ovule contains one female gamete. So before fertilization, pollination occurs, and through the pollination, pollen grain reaches on stigma of the flower, and through the pollen grain, male gametes enters into the ovule and reaches near female gamete. Now, this is the carpel or pistil of the flower. This is stigma, style, ovary, ovule, and this is embryo sac. Inside the embryo sac, secondary nucleus is there, diploid, and then egg cell. Egg cell is the female gamete, haploid, and these two cells are synergids, and these cells are antipodal cells. Through the pollination, pollen grains land on stigma. Lands on stigma. On stigma, pollen grain absorb sugary fluid. Sugary fluid, that is a water and minerals salt. Water and mineral salt. The solution of water and mineral salt, that is a sugary fluid. So after landing on the stigma, pollen grain absorbs sugary fluid, and after the absorption of sugary fluid, pollen tube arises, and this pollen tube grow in length by getting nutrition from the wall of style. This pollen tube grows in length according to the length of style by getting the nutrition from the wall of the style and enter into ovary and reaches near micropyle. Inside the pollen tube, there is a tube cell and two male gametes. This pollen tube enters into ovule, then after it enters into the embryo sac, and after entry, pollen tube discharges or releases the both male gametes into the embryo sac by the three ways. First, after entry, pollen tube burst and releases the male gamete. Or after entry, pollen tube divides into two branches and each branch releases each male gamete. Or after entry, two pores develop on the tip of the pollen tube and from each pore one male gamete releases. After the releasing of male gametes into the embryo sac, fertilization occurs. Secondary nucleus and one male gamete. And one male gamete plus egg cell, secondary nucleus and one male gamete. The fusion takes place between the one male gamete and egg cell, secondary nucleus and one male gamete. So now the male gametes and the egg cell fuses together to form diploid zygote. And this process of fusion is known as true fertilization or generative fertilization. True fertilization or generative fertilization. Now the second male gamete fuses with the secondary nucleus and forms triploid nucleus. And this process of fusion is known as vegetative fertilization or triple fusion. The entire phenomena, true fertilization and vegetative fertilization, collectively known as double fertilization. That means in the same embryo sac, two acts of fertilization occurs. One with the egg cell or female gamete, one with the secondary nucleus. So the entire process, the true fertilization and the vegetative fertilization, collectively known as double fertilization. We can define the double fertilization in another way. The process of fusion of two male gametes with two different haploid cells to form two different structures brought by pollen tube is called double fertilization. That means the process of fusion of two male gametes with two different cells brought by pollen tube to produce two different structures is called double fertilization. And S.N. Navastian discovered this double fertilization in angiospermic plants in 1898. After the fertilization, zygote develops into embryo, and this triploid nucleus develops into food storing tissue, and that food storing tissue is known as endosperm. These endosperms provide nutrition to the developing embryo. So in this way, fertilization occurs in flowering plants.